The man with the yellow hat is a jerk. The man with the yellow hat is a jerk. The man with the yellow hat is a jerk. So it all starts off with the man with the yellow hat telling George that he has to leave. He tells him to play with his ball till he gets back, and that he should not get too curious. Which is about like telling your 2-year-old daughter to act like an adult. So after the man with the yellow hat leaves, George plays with his ball till he enters a room with a big window. And of course, when seeing the big window, George looks outside and sees the house next door. A little tiny house next to that house with a huge stone wall around it, and a lake beyond that. George gets curious about the little house and ends up going outside, which means the man with the yellow hat could not be bothered to lock his house up when leaving George alone. What if some robber entered the home and stole George? What an irresponsible person. So George goes and trespasses on the neighbor's property by climbing onto the wall, then jumping down. He goes up to the little house and discovers it has a grown-up mama rabbit and a bunch of bunnies. George gets curious. He gets one of the bunnies out without getting the rest of them out. Then he decides to play hide-and-go-seek with it. But then when turning around to let the bunny hide and trying to find the bunny, he ends up realizing that he's lost the bunny. Then he gets a really good idea. He gets a string from a shed nearby and goes back to the cage of bunnies. He lets the mama rabbit out without letting out the other bunnies. He then ties the string to the mama rabbit and lets her track down her young son. Then the mama rabbit is able to track down her young son, and it turns out he is hiding in a hole at the bottom of a nearby tree. Yay for George! That was a smart thing to do. And so he is able to put the mama rabbit and the bunny back into the cage. And then he goes away from there and decides to go to the lake. He sees this man fishing. This man is so into his fishing, he doesn't even hear George behind him. He sees this man catch a fish with a fishing pole, put it into a bucket with some other fish, and then sees him leave with the bucket of fish. George then goes back to the house of the man with the yellow hat. He then takes a mop, puts string on it, and then pulls a hook off the wall of the kitchen in what looks like a dangerous way. Also, doing so will cause some damage to the kitchen wall, but if anybody deserves that, it's the irresponsible man with the yellow hat. Though, of course, it's a metal hook that isn't sharp at all and is therefore worthless for fishing. He also takes cake as bait for the fish. Then he goes back to the lake to fish with the worthless fishing pole and of course doesn't catch any fish. Then, here comes the really bad part. George leans over to grab a fish out of the water and falls in. It looks like he's going to drown. But miraculously, George manages to swim to shore. Then he meets his neighbor Bill, who looks like to be about 10 years old. Bill is alone, but this was the 1940s when that would have been okay. It was also okay when I was a kid in the 90s. So George goes with Bill, who has a kite, and they go to fly it. But it gets stuck in a tree. George goes to get it out of the tree and succeeds. But then, after George has retrieved it, he ends up trying to fly it himself and ends up being blown into the air along with the kite. Bill runs off and finds the man with the yellow hat who just now is driving back in his convertible. He has this look of horror on his face. But then what does he expect leaving his home unlocked for George to get out of? So the man with the yellow hat goes off to get something he needs. And what is that thing? A helicopter! This proves the man with the yellow hat is a millionaire. He probably didn't even earn his money. He probably inherited it from his parents and just pays a guy to run his parents' business. He was probably flying around in it earlier. Anyway, the man with the yellow hat retrieves George and the kite. Then he takes him back to Bill's house, where Bill gives him one of the bunnies from earlier. Then George takes it home and feeds it a carrot. And knowing that it isn't in any of the later books after this, it probably escaped from his house and ended up getting eaten by a coyote. Let's prosecute. The man with the yellow hat leaves George at his house alone and doesn't bother to lock the doors and windows before doing so. This results in George escaping, trespassing on the next door neighbor's property, where he nearly loses one of their bunnies. Then later, also because of his negligence, George both almost drowns and almost dies from falling from a great height. The man with the yellow hat is a jerk!